Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are getting into some territory that is, well, let's just say it is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a gentle guide on how to pick up a Sunday hobby.
No, definitely not. If you are tuning in looking for a standard self-help book, you might want to check the archives. But if you are looking for the hard truths about the history of our institutions,
And specifically how they function before and after certain ideological shifts.
right? If you want to, I guess you could call it a red pill perspective on modern society, you are in exactly the right place. We are stripping away the varnish today.
We really are. We are looking right at the grain of society. And honestly, what we found in this source material is intense. It challenges a lot of the mainstream narratives we hear every day.
Before we jump into the deep end, do us a quick favor. Hit that like and subscribe button right now. You do not want to miss these dives, especially when we find material this provocative. Okay, so today we are unpacking a specific ebook with a title that sounds like a total paradox. When I first saw it, I honestly thought it was a joke.
I think a lot of people probably do.
But it might be the most aggressive cultural critique we've read all year. It is called Stamp Collecting, Holding Far Left Degeneracy at Bay by Conrad Riker.
And please do not let that title fool you. The author is very clear that this isn't really about adhesive postage.
Right.
Riker has written what he calls an ultra-long, incisive manifesto. It's a fascinating look at what he describes as the systematic dismantling of masculine purpose.
By what he terms feminists and Marxists.
Exactly. He argues that the removal of traditional hobbies and crafts wasn't an accident. He claims it was a calculated move to capture institutions.
It sounds wild, right? That a quiet, nerdy hobby like stamp collecting could be a weapon against degeneracy.
It does sound like a stretch at first glance.
But once you get into Riker's reclamation blueprint, it starts to construct a logic that is really hard to look away from. The mission of this deep dive is to understand his central argument.
Which is that your grandfather's tool belt and his stamp album were actually training grounds.
They weren't just ways to pass the time.
Right. He argues they were forges for virtues. Things like stoicism, logic, provision. And his thesis is that by removing those training grounds, society deliberately left men psychologically and structurally vulnerable.
Exactly. Now listen, if you find these concepts fascinating, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy Stamp Collecting, Holding Far Left Degeneracy at Bay. Get the full text to understand his full argument.
It is definitely worth reading the source directly.
But for now, let's set the stage. We are going to explore why Riker believes your grandfather's tool belt was a threat to the modern social order.
It starts with a very powerful image in the first chapter, the blacksmith.
Oh man, this part really stuck with me. Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Riker opens with this stat that just floored me. He asks the reader to think back to 1985.
Which is not ancient history.
Right, not ancient history at all. In 1985, America had 120,000 working blacksmiths. Men shaping metal, working with fire, building things. Today, that number is fewer than 7,000.
It's a staggering drop. We are talking about a near extinction event for a trade that essentially built civilization.
Yeah.
But Riker argues this isn't just about economics or outsourcing. It represents a loss of tactile mastery.
Tactile mastery, I like that term.
It's crucial to his entire argument. When you lose the ability to shape the physical world, he claims you lose a part of your psychological grounding. He compares this to the automotive industry.
The Stuttgart example.
Yes. He talks about his time in Stuttgart, watching the old-school Mercedes-Benz training programs. Back in the day, trainees spent years hand-shaping engine parts.
They had to take a block of metal and file it to exact measurements by eye and hand.
Right. Riker describes the sound of the file, the feeling of the metal heating up under your fingers.
Yeah.
It was about knowing the material intimately.
And contrast that with the modern trainees he describes.
Exactly. He describes them taking VR courses. Sure, they finish the training in half the time, but he argues they are helpless without digital diagnostics.
He had that story, it was almost painful to read, about asking a new trainee to assemble a carburetor without looking.
Yes.
That was something a 1970s mechanic could do in his sleep, purely by feel.
Yes.
And this kid, his hands were shaking, he had to pull out his phone and Google it.
And this leads to Riker's key concept: competence cages chaos.
Competence cages chaos.
The argument is that men have outsourced their judgment to apps, to Google, to so-called experts. When you can't fix the things around you, you feel helpless. Riker posits that real masculinity requires friction. It requires calluses.
And failure.
And failure, yes. The The digital world removes that friction, and in doing so, he argues it weakens the man.
So it's the difference between playing a video game about war and actually cleaning a rifle. One is just a dopamine hit, and the other is an actual discipline.
Precisely. And that brings us to the title subject. Why on earth stamp collecting? It seems so passive compared to blacksmithing.
I thought the exact same thing. I pictured a guy in a cardigan just sorting paper. But Riker frames it as civilization's backup drive.
That is a very heavy title for a hobby.
It is, but hear him out. Riker describes stamps as forensic markers of history. He argues that stamps represent objective reality.
For example, he mentions how you can track Nazi propaganda routes by looking at Bavarian Hindenburg issues.
Right, so these aren't just stickers. They are actual physical evidence.
They are evidence that cannot be deleted or rewritten by a modern algorithm. If a server crashes, the stamp is still there. If history gets rewritten by a new political movement, the stamp remains.
And there's a biological component he brings into this too. The male brain argument regarding who actually does this hobby.
Yes, he cites the American Philatelic Society, noting that the membership is 79% male.
Which is huge.
It is. Now, the modern view would say that is just social conditioning, and we need to make it more inclusive. But Riker argues the exact opposite. He says this is evolutionary psychology.
That men are wired to systematize physical artifacts.
While women, he claims, are generally wired to gather social networks. So men map territory, and women map relationships.
And he argues that when you try to force men out of that systematizing role or tell them it's toxic, you get chaos. This brings up the James Damore anecdote.
The Google memo firing.
Yeah, that was a massive cultural flashpoint. Damore writes a memo about biological differences and gets fired. Riker uses that as a perfect example of what he calls the armor argument.
Right. While the internet was exploding with outrage over Damore, everyone's screaming and trying to destroy the guy.
Riker describes his own evening. He was sitting at his desk in total silence, verifying a printing flaw on a stamp using ultraviolet light.
That image is so stark. The world is on fire with social hysteria, and he is focused on a microscopic detail of a physical object.
And that's his point. The hobby provides a buffer against chaos. It shields you from ideological poison because you are focusing on objective reality.
A stamp is either genuine or it's a fake. It doesn't care about your feelings or your politics. It allows men to detach from the social noise.
Speaking of feelings, this leads us right into one of the most aggressive points in the book. The vulnerability double bind.
This is a critical part of his framework.
Riker really goes after this modern idea that men should open up and be more emotional.
The trap, as he describes it, is that society, and specifically feminism, tells men they need to be vulnerable, that it's okay to cry. But Riker argues this is a lie.
He says the moment men do that, they are severely punished for it.
And he uses some pretty brutal data to support this. He cites research showing that when male CEOs cry during layoffs or crises, their competence ratings drop by 30%.
30%.
But when female executives cry, their likability ratings actually go up.
So he's saying it's a rigged game. If men play by the new rules, they lose.
Completely. He also notes that divorce rates triple when men confess vulnerabilities prematurely to their partners.
And then there's the story of the Men's Healing Circle in Seattle. That one was almost a horror story.
It really was. It was a group designed for men to share their trauma, but it shut down because 80% of the attendees reported that their sharing was later used against them.
In arguments with partners, custody battles, false accusations.
Exactly. Riker's point is that vulnerability is marketed to men as liberation, but in practice, it functions as ammunition.
He uses this amazing analogy from the leatherworking chapter to explain how men actually function. The stitching pony.
For those who don't know, a stitching pony is a wooden clamp used to hold leather while you sew it.
Right. And Riker points out that you have to clamp the leather incredibly hard, like 300 pounds of pressure, to get a perfect stitch.
If the leather is loose, the needle wanders, the line isn't straight, and the seam fails.
And his metaphor is that men are the leather. They thrive under the clamp of stoicism and pressure. That constriction is what makes them effective.
When you release that pressure, when you tell men to just let it all out, he argues they fall apart, they lose their shape.
So what society calls toxic masculinity, things like aggression and stoicism, he is saying those are what actually save society during a crisis.
He points to the 9/11 firefighters. They didn't pause for therapy on the stairs of the Twin Towers. They suppressed their fear, utilized their strength, and did the job.
Society demands that utility from men during a crisis, but vilifies the traits that make it possible during peacetime.
Exactly. And he expands this into what he calls Wood's truth.
cutting against the grain.
Right. If you plane wood against the grain, it shatters. Riker argues that modern society is trying to build against the grain of biological reality.
He drops some heavy stats here regarding what men and women actually prioritize.
He cites data claiming 91% of women prioritize resources in a partner, while men overwhelmingly prioritize youth and beauty. He argues biological essentialism is real and can't be engineered away.
He also looks at workplace danger. 93% of occupational deaths are men.
Oil rig divers, Alaskan pipeline workers.
The deep, cold, lethal work. Riker argues that feminists demand equality in the safe, air-conditioned boardrooms, but not in the trenches.
And this biological difference extends to communication, too. He tells a story about the Lehman Brothers collapse.
He was on Wall Street during the crash, right?
He was. He describes absolute panic on the trading floor, but the men reverted to grunts and hand signals to save millions of dollars in seconds.
He compares it to the Hadza hunters in Tanzania. Specialized low-frequency communication.
Exactly. But he contrasts this with female colleagues who, in the middle of this financial firestorm, were demanding structured debriefs.
They wanted to process the event emotionally while the building was effectively burning down.
And Riker says that is the issue with forced emotional intelligence training. It disrupts these masculine communication channels designed for crisis.
It forces men to communicate against the grain.
It does.
But the war isn't just cultural, according to the book. It's technological. We have to talk about digital ghosts.
This chapter is terrifying. He calls social media platforms Skinner boxes designed to hijack male dopamine.
He cites a stat that men who engage in 10 or more digital chats a day are 3 times more likely to be depressed.
But the loss of legacy is his main point here. 97% of deceased users' profiles become ghost ships.
Contrast that with a physical stamp album. That album lasts centuries. A digital feed is deleted by a server crash or a ban.
He also critiques what he calls the simp economy. Young men transferring their wealth to attention merchants like female streamers for hollow validation.
So Riker did an experiment to break this cycle. The Nokia brick experiment.
He switched to a dumb phone for 90 days. No apps, no scrolling. The result. He wrote 2 books, rebuilt an engine, and his gym lifts went up by 22%.
22% just by getting off social media. That shows how much energy is being leached away.
We don't realize how drained we are until we unplug.
So we have the cultural attack, the technological trap, and then he outlines institutional betrayal, education, and corporate America.
He calls it academic betrayal. Vocational shops are being replaced by yoga mats.
Even though an MIT study he cites shows vocational students earn 32% higher wages by age 35 than their academic peers.
Schools still cut the shop programs. He calls it a credentialing cult. Companies reject self-taught geniuses to satisfy investors with degree holders.
He compares this to the German Meister system, which judges entirely on skill, not sociology papers.
Right, and he says diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are destroying these natural competence hierarchies. He calls it the corporate cage.
He uses the Boeing example. When Boeing sidelined engineers for diversity committees, planes literally crashed.
He also notes that all male startup teams raised $470 million more than mixed teams, arguing that investors bet their money on focus, not social engineering.
So institutions are captured, technology is a trap, and culture is gaslighting men. What is the listener supposed to do? Riker offers the Phoenix Project.
It is about reclamation. First step, reskill, learn a trade. He says shared blisters create deeper memory than shared screens.
Second step is mentorship, the grandfather to grandson pipeline.
Bypass the femme-centric education system entirely. Teach skills directly.
And the third step is digital triage. Delete the apps. Use the ODA loop observe, orient, decide, act to bypass paralysis.
He sums it all up with the metaphor of the anvil.
The anvil absorbs the strike and redirects energy. Riker says men must become the anvil, unbroken by cultural pressure.
If we look at the core philosophy, this isn't just nostalgia, it is a survival strategy. If you don't build a physical legacy, a cabinet, a collection of family, you are just a digital ghost.
Riker is asking the listener to step out of the clown world and rebuild civilization with their own hands.
He points out that when the servers eventually crash or the power goes out, your NFT collection helps no one.
That brings us to our final thought. When the lights go out, do you have the skills to keep the fire burning, or just a dead phone in your hand?
If you don't have an answer, you might want to start looking for a hobby.
If you want to dig deeper into this analysis, follow the author directly. at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
And remember to fully grasp these concepts, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy Stamp Collecting, holding far left degeneracy at bay.
Support the message, like, subscribe, and start building. We will see you on the next deep dive.